So, Paul, would you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Paul Goodland. I'm a teacher in Hillsborough County, Florida.
So, what can you say in general, like on an even national level, this assault on teachers? What's it all about?
Well, it's ideology, and I think some people have bought into some very simple ideas, and they're not really critical thinkers. Maybe that's on us as educators to try to bring that along. But I think there's a lot of people who have bought into the choice idea. They think choice means something other than segregation or separate opportunity. I think there's a lot of people who have the free market mindset, and they think all schools should be in a free market situation because they believe that competition will always make things better. And so we're fighting that. And in Florida, it's probably as intense as anywhere in the country. We also have representatives and senators who are in the charter business who are introducing the vast majority of these bills. So the conflict of interest is just astonishing, and it's just happening every day.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. This episode is going to be about charter schools. We already heard the episode about charter schools. We get it. There are a lot of people that feel very strongly against them. But that actually isn't really what this episode is about. So bear with me. I'm Nathaniel Bozarth, and this is Wide Rule, Brain Roots podcast on the past and present of equality in education. This episode is made possible by the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, one of the largest national teachers unions in the country. The opinions and viewpoints espoused by today's guests are their own. Every guest, however, is a union member, and with that may come a particular slant or perspective. AFT had no editorial say regarding the content of this episode at any point in its production. You'll notice some background noise throughout the episode. We recorded this episode on Radio Row at AFT's annual Teach conference in Washington, D.C. All of the educators in today's episode, however, are from Florida, the fourth most populous state in the union. And finally, before we go on, I want to give a shout out to Dan and Emily Becker. Thanks for your support on Patreon. You are the literal best. All right, let's get started. So I hear you are, is it your local that is kind of spearheading the lawsuit against HB 7069? Is that right?
Well, we are tied in with our Broward School District. So we have our teachers union, who is a separate entity. The Broward School Board is their entity, and then we have a collective bargaining with each other. And we have grown so much in this past year of collaboratively working together. And yes, the teachers union 100% supports the Broward School District for taking that lead and filing the lawsuit.
This is Anna Fusco, the president of the Broward Teachers Union. Broward County includes the cities of Fort Lauderdale and Hollywood, Florida. We're talking about House Bill 7069, which was voted into law in Florida on June 15th, 2017. What about it is unconstitutional?
The way that Rick Scott signed it, it was bad legislation design. It's a 274-page bill. It makes many changes to our state law. It allows charter schools to make money that school districts levy for construction and maintenance through local property taxes. Under state law, school districts are permitted to raise up to $1.50 for every $1,000 in taxable property value to raise money for construction, maintenance, and buying equipment. HB 7069 would require school districts to give a large share of that money to charter schools in their county, which just in a nutshell would mean that more public money going to charter schools which are privately operated and whose facilities are privately owned. And it's just taking money away from our 40,000 students that are attending public schools. So now our tax dollars will be funneled and funded into these companies that are just making a bunch of money off of us, just a tremendous amount of money.
We'll hear more from Anna later. The next two teachers are from the Tampa area.
Laura Jane Reedus, educator in Hillsborough County Public Schools.
Kathy Ponov, educator, Hillsborough County Public Schools.
So let's talk about. Are both of you familiar with the House bill that just came through in Florida?
Yes.
Oh,
The
God, yes.
House bill.
We're familiar.
Okay, so tell me. Yeah. So House Bill 7069. It's not a good deal.
No, and it's about 200 pages long, and I'm not sure how many people have read the whole thing from beginning to end. But what I do know is it's the worst piece of legislation to come out of Florida government in probably all of history. For government officials who have not spent 30 seconds in a classroom other than when they were a child, to decide how that money is spent is such a disservice to our kids and so unfair to our students.
Here's the catch that really burns my bacon. Even if the school fails, the corporation can keep the building. It's now turned out to be a land grab. This is a way of getting buildings built for for-profit companies.
Catherine's referring to the provision in House Bill 769 that allows public tax dollars to go to new construction for charter schools. Wide Ruled staff was unable to ascertain whether this is the first time tax dollars have been allocated for new school construction. What we know is that this is definitely an exceptional scenario. Most states expect charter schools to fundraise for their own buildings.
It's not fair to everyone in the state, the taxpayers, that money can be diverted according to however those elected officials feel that goes to their groups, their friends. And a lot of these elected officials are tied to charter schools. They have ties to the companies that run them, that own them, and it's not out there, and they're basically taking the money for themselves.
So when you say ties, you're saying it's a conflict of interest.
It's absolutely a conflict of interest. It may not be their name on that charter school company, but somehow.
Sometimes it's the spouse. Here's the worst thing that we saw this a couple of years ago at our own school. A charter school after what we call FTE, which is full-time equivalent. At that point, a school gives you the number of students, and the state then gives them the money for each student. What happened soon after FTE and after the charter school had gotten the money, they shut down, walked away with the money. So now the kids are back in our public schools and we don't get the money for them. Let me tell you how angry we are in a situation like that, where we have to buy our own copy paper. Please tell me where this makes sense.
Right. We fact-checked her. A 2015 report from the Miami Herald asserted that the public had given $71 million in public dollars to charter schools, which subsequently closed. The report goes on to say that of that $71 million, only $133,000 had been recovered by the state. The rest of that money was forever gone, sequestered in past rent payments or renovations to properties retained by private companies, in the coffers of those companies or the pockets of individuals. I guess I'm still young and naive enough that even though I'm highly critical of national and international systems that perpetuate inequality, I want to believe individuals are generally good, if oftentimes actively ignoring the facts of inequity. So I wanted to ask, and you'll hear me ask again later, why the heck would someone use education as a means to elicit financial gain? So why is it still happening? Are people just bemused? Are there legislators? Why are they still so gung-ho? Or what?
It's exactly what you said. It's economics. Somebody's getting money, whether it's a spouse, a brother-in-law, or whatever. It's very suspicious.
Mm-hmm. I think it's low voter turnout. A lot of people will only go to the polls when it's up for president. They don't pay attention to their local politics, whether it's school board, like Speaker Corcoran, who's from a tiny part on the coast of Florida. Local elections matter, and that's the other reason I believe in my association, because we have to get our own neighbors next door to us, across the street, across the river. We need to get everyone to go to every election that happens, not just when a president comes up every 4 years.
That association that Laura Jane refers to is her local teachers union. or not, you still haven't heard the bulk of this bill and the real conspiracy that I felt like I was unearthing. Before we really get into that, I want you to hear from the highest-ranking teacher unionist in Florida. He gives his take on the bill, and then, I think, a really useful caveat.
I'm Frederick Ingram, the Vice President for the Florida Education Association, former high school band director for 12 years in Miami-Dade County. So I'm originally from Miami, Florida, but I moved up to Tallahassee to take the position of Vice President for our statewide teachers union.
Would you tell me about House Bill 7069? What is it and how is it endangering Florida schools?
Sure. Well, House Bill 7069 is unfortunately one of a multi-pronged approach from our state government in an approach to what we believe dismantle public education. And so this is the latest step in trying to get public dollars out to fund charter schools and private schools.
Okay, here's the caveat. Frederick doesn't actually think charter schools are bad in themselves. Listen to this.
So let me say this. Some of our charter schools have done really good work. In the past 20 years, we have seen an evolution of charter schools that has not done a good service to our country. Charter schools started off as boutique schools, as a school that would offer something unique that a public school maybe either couldn't offer or wouldn't offer, or a student or students had a particular interest in. And these schools were going to be small in nature. They were going to offer unique opportunities for a select number of students, which is fine, but we've lost our way. Charter schools are now corporate ventures. It's almost like venture capitalism with no accountability. There is a segregist effort. It's the have and have-nots, right? What we know about charter schools is they will teach certain kids and won't teach others. And when you don't have the same type of accountability system, when you're not held by the same standards, when you can, in Florida, open a charter school with teachers that are not certified, when you can have students that come in and come out, that's not fair to any community. It's not fair to white kids. It's not fair to black kids. It's not fair to Hispanic kids. It's just not a fair system. But education is supposed to be that cornerstone of democracy that creates parity, that creates equality.
So last question, Frederick. This push for charter schools and the negative effects it has for students of color, for low-income students, is it intentional? Is it, wealthy white folks are intentionally hurting the have-nots, as you said? Or is it
So yes,
yeah.
but I don't believe it has anything to do with kids. That's unfortunate. It has something to do with money and power, and they're trying to raid the public sector monies and put it into private entities. These people who are doing this, these politicians, they can care less about what happens to kids. They've never sat in the classroom. They're not educators. Their kids are largely going to be okay simply because they have money, power, or influence, and that they can either homeschool or they can send them to a specific boutique school somewhere in their city. So it has nothing to do for them at all with kids.
Okay, to recap, you've just heard 5 different Florida educators lambast this new legislation, Florida House Bill 7069. Nearly all of them see the bill not in isolation, but as the logical next step in a continuing onslaught against students and for legislators padding their pockets. And it's true, several Florida representatives, including Manny Diaz, Michael Belecca, and Richard Corcoran, have ties to charter schools in Florida. Notably, Richard Corcoran was the bill's main architect, formulating it behind closed doors in secret, similar to how the presently tabled AHCA was crafted on Capitol Hill in Washington. But what we're getting to has meaning for all educators, parents, and students, regardless of what state you live in. We're talking to Ana Fusco, Kenny Menchu, and Liliano Ruido, all 3 of them teaching in Broward County, the 6th most populous school district in the country. We heard from Ana earlier when she mentioned that Broward County Public Schools are filing suit against the state of Florida in response to HB 7069. Here's Ana now.
One of the other biggest piece that is, unconstitutional is that it gives charter schools more rights, and they don't have to have the qualifications and the standards that a traditional public school has. They have this saying, they're just called Schools of Hope program, where we have schools throughout our district that have low ratings of how students perform on these high-stakes tests. And charter schools can move into the communities because there's $140 million put in this pot to help these charter schools move into these communities and build big brand new buildings. And they can hire teachers that don't have college degrees. They don't have teacher certifications. They have no education background. And they feel that that would be a new hope for these public school children to get a better education. So that piece right there is detrimental to all of our students that need and deserve a quality public education. I truly believe in when these high-stakes testing came around, it is a false way to judge a child if they're learning, if they're growing. It's just somebody who created this type of test that we never get to see. We never get to see how it's graded. We just get a result, and it says, A, B, C, D, or F for our schools. And if you are an F at a certain length of time, you should be in a possibility of closing down. And then a charter school can come in and build a brand new building and say, look, here we have a better education to offer your children.
High-stakes testing is what this episode is really about. High-stakes testing refers to using student test scores as a rubric for teachers, schools, or students. In Florida's high-stakes environment, student improvement on exams from year to year is used to calculate a teacher value-added score. Teachers are then incentivized to teach to the test, lest their job security be endangered. Raj Chetty, John Friedman, and Jonah Rockoff, on behalf of the National Bureau of Economic Research, released the results of a study back in 2011, noting that value-added measurements may be an effective tool to evaluate teachers, but they cautioned that value-added measurements had never been studied in a high-stakes setting. That is, all the prior research on value-added had been conducted in settings where teachers were not incentivized by variable job security or other financial incentives. Chetty, Friedman, and Rockoff urged that caution be used when applying value-added measurement because there was insufficient study on value-added measurements in high-stakes environments. So the argument as made experientially by many teachers and students is that high-stakes testing takes away from all the less tangible parts of getting an education, like soft skills, socio-emotional wellness, critical thinking, the arts, exposure to a breadth of ideas and experiences. I could go on. When teachers are under pressure to have their kids do really well on a test that measures a very limited amount of skills and knowledge, they cannot adequately focus on all the other important lessons they'd like to impart to our kids. This is Kenny Minshew, another teacher from Broward County, Florida.
Profits over pupils. That's right. That's what it's about. It's not about educating the kid like they sell it to the masses. It's about making profits off our children. And then when they take these high-stakes tests, our children are basically, essentially, free child labor for these industries that are making these tests. Like Ms. Fusco said, that we don't get to see the test. We don't get to see what the child got wrong on the test. So if it's really about me being an effective teacher in the classroom, I ought to be able to see what the child got wrong so I can retweak my game the following year with the group that comes through my doors. So I stand a chance with those children. But it's not really about that. The long overarching idea here is it's about privatization, just like the prison system. And we really need to fight back against this.
So can you think of any good intention that might be there? That's is there? I want to believe is it just bad people that are putting charter schools forward, or is it like people who are ignorant or people who are deceived?
I don't want to say any of the. I don't think they're bad. I don't think they're ignorant. I don't think they're deceived. I think that they just have an intention of greed. They know exactly what they're doing. It is to feed off of something that is the largest in our country. Children need to go to school. And they see that it is one of the biggest chunks besides our health care and our budget.
As you can tell, this really bothered me, that people were getting rich at the expense of our kids' education. I was reading articles about racketeering and embezzlement in schools, doing research for this episode. In one case, a charter school CEO in Pennsylvania embezzled millions of dollars by writing checks to himself from the school. Then, on June 19th, 2017, the Florida state attorney indicted 2 Florida businessmen for stealing millions of dollars in public funds by overcharging charter schools for educational services rendered. The 2 men owned both the charter schools and the educational service companies. But here's the crazy thing that I've got to tell you. This happens in public schools too. Chicago Public Schools Chief Executive Barbara Byrd Bennett resigned in June 2015 after allegations of fraudulent dealings. In April of this year, she was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. She gave a $20.5 million contract without going through the lawful bidding process to her previous employer, for which she received an under-the-table commission. So, the profit motive in education isn't relegated to charter schools, unfortunately. But in Florida, the two seem inextricably connected. Here's more on how testing is a part of that mix. So we talked about the grading system for schools and how that system intentionally divests confidence from the public education. Is that what's happening as well, that parents will send their children to charter schools because they lack confidence in the public schools?
We've grown up in our society of grades. That's how we are in our school system. You knew when you got an A, you must have done something great. If you got a D or an F, that means you didn't do so great. So when they're exposing these grades, parents, automatically gravitate towards, well, my kid's in an F school. Something must be wrong. Why are they not learning? It's proven that our students, no matter whether they're in an F school or an A school, they have, first and foremost, certified qualified teachers. And they are learning and they are growing, but this test that has been maliciously created to show nothing but I'm just going to be frank, BS. It's human nature. We feel we want the best for our kids. If a brand new school's moving in and they're going to be hiring fresh and new, innovating type of people, they don't know what they're getting until they actually get in there and they live it or feel it.
So I want to make sure that when I present this to my listeners, because to be honest, it sounds it sounds kind of out there sometimes.
We feel like it's a conspiracy.
Right.
Absolutely.
So is there another measure of I want some sort of data or something I can present to my listeners? Here's evidence of how students are succeeding, even when the test says they're not. Do you have any sort of evidence like that I could present? Measuring where students are
we
actually
have where we create tests. Our district creates different type of tests. Those kids are passing those tests, which are coming from highly qualified, highly certified teachers that are creating these tests. So they're passing those tests. So that's data. And we do have alternate tests that if the students don't pass the FSA, they need to take that rigorous type of test, and they're passing it. Some of our students that get out of high school and they didn't pass that test to get out of high school, and they do whatever they need to take to get their high school diploma, are still going on to higher ed, and they are succeeding and they are getting into the world and some type of career, and they're making it. So that shows it's a success rate. And we don't have a large entity of the pipeline from schoolhouse to prison. That is drastically decreased, so that's a great success. So it is working in our school system, even though they have the pressures of the high-stakes test.
And it frustrates me as a teacher. It used to be, back in the day, the teacher determined whether little Johnny moved on up to 4th grade and so forth. But if the test is going to be the be-all, end-all, and going to override my authority in the classroom as a teacher, why do I give grades? Why do I have to do a report card? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it divests teachers of authority.
Correct.
I mean, private schools. People that pay to send their kids to wealthy private schools, they don't take high-stakes testing. Right. So why aren't they taking it? Why aren't they being pushed into it? They get everything that public education was
And then they
and should be.
and go to Ivy League schools.
Right.
So it's clearly not the testing that is helping them
That's
succeed.
right.
The test no longer serves as a tool to benefit both students and teachers as they work together in a mutual pursuit of learning. Rather, the test is now an end in itself. And it's not even the students who are being tested. It's really the teachers in their school buildings. You can support Wide Rule by pledging as little as $1 per episode we churn out at patreon.com/widerulepodcast, or you can support us by sharing this episode with a friend. Your support helps us advance the cause of equity in education. I'm Nathaniel Bozarth. I produce Wide Ruled along with executive producer Christopher Cook. You can see some photos from AFT Teach as well as a list of resources for this episode at brainroot.tv/Wide Ruled Podcast. Thanks for listening.